Sarah stared at the ceiling of their bedroom, listening to David's steady breathing beside her. 3 years ago, she would have found comfort in that sound. Now, it felt like a reminder of the distance between them. The space in their king-size bed had grown wider than the physical inches that separated their bodies. The morning routine had become mechanical. David would wake at 6:15, shower, grab his coffee, and leave for his accounting firm with barely a goodbye. Sarah would get their 8-year-old daughter Emma ready for school, then head to her job at the local library. They moved around each other like polite strangers sharing the same house. It hadn't always been this way. Sarah remembered the early days of their marriage when David would surprise her with handwritten notes in her lunch bag, when they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. They had been best friends who fell in love, partners who dreamed of building a life together. Now, those dreams felt buried under layers of resentment and unspoken grievances. The turning point had come 6 months earlier when Sarah discovered David's secret. Not an affair, but something that felt equally devastating to their trust. David had been hiding their mounting financial troubles from her, making decisions about their savings, their daughter's college fund, and even taking out loans without her knowledge. When the bank called about an overdue payment, the carefully constructed facade crumbled. "I was trying to protect you," David had said during their explosive argument that night. "I thought I could fix it before you had to worry." "Protect me?" Sarah had shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "By lying to me? By treating me like a child who can't handle the truth about our own life?" That fight had opened a floodgate of other grievances. Sarah accused David of shutting her out of important decisions, of prioritizing his work over their family, of making her feel invisible in her own marriage. David countered that Sarah was never satisfied with his efforts, that she criticized everything he did, that he felt like he was walking on eggshells in his own home. The weeks that followed were filled with cold silences and careful politeness for Emma's sake. They attended Emma's school play together, sitting side by side but worlds apart. They hosted family dinners where they played the part of a happy couple while their hearts felt hollow. The pretense was exhausting. Sarah found herself questioning everything. Had she been too critical? Had her perfectionist tendencies pushed David away? But then she would remember the shock of discovering their financial situation, the betrayal of being kept in the dark about their own future, and the anger would return. David, meanwhile, threw himself deeper into work, staying late at the office and bringing files home on weekends. He told himself he was trying to fix the financial mess, but Sarah saw it as another way of avoiding their problems. The distance between them grew wider. Their friends began to notice. Lisa, Sarah's closest friend since college, gently asked if everything was okay. Sarah wanted to confide in someone, but the words felt too heavy, too real. Admitting their marriage was in trouble would make it true in a way that keeping it private somehow didn't. One evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter looked up with worried eyes. "Mommy, are you and Daddy okay? You don't laugh together anymore." The innocent question hit Sarah like a physical blow. They had promised themselves they would never let their problems affect Emma, but children see everything. Their daughter was already feeling the chill that had settled over their home. That night, Sarah lay awake long after David had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was how marriages ended. Not with dramatic confrontations or passionate affairs, but with a slow erosion of connection, trust slipping away like sand through fingers, until nothing remained but two people who shared a mortgage and a child, but no longer shared their hearts. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning in October. Emma had been unusually quiet during breakfast, picking at her cereal and avoiding eye contact with both parents. David was buried in his phone, checking emails before his first client meeting, while Sarah packed Emma's lunch with the efficiency of someone going through familiar motions. "I don't want to go to school today," Emma announced suddenly, her voice small and uncertain. Sarah looked up from the sandwich she was wrapping. "Are you feeling sick, sweetheart?" Emma shook her head, then burst into tears. "Tommy Martinez's parents are getting divorced, and his dad doesn't live with them anymore. He said maybe my dad will move away too because you and Daddy don't talk anymore." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. David's phone clattered onto the counter as he looked up, his face pale. Sarah felt her heart stop, then begin racing. They had failed in their most important promise, to protect their daughter from their problems. Sarah knelt beside Emma's chair, pulling her daughter into her arms. "Oh, honey, Daddy isn't going anywhere. We're having some grown-up problems that we need to work out." "But you don't laugh together," Emma sobbed into Sarah's shoulder. "And Daddy sleeps in the guest room sometimes. And you both look sad all the time." David moved around the counter, his face stricken. When he reached for Emma, Sarah didn't pull away. For the first time in months, they were united in something, their love for their daughter and their horror at what they had put her through. After David called in sick to work and Sarah arranged for a substitute at the library, they sat Emma down for a gentle conversation. They assured her that she was loved, that their problems were adult issues she didn't need to worry about, and that they were going to work harder to fix things. Once Emma was settled with her grandmother for the day, Sarah and David found themselves alone in their living room, really alone, for the first time in months. The silence stretched between them, but it felt different somehow, less angry, more fragile. "We're destroying our family," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their early dating days when he was nervous. "I know. God, Sarah, I know." When I saw Emma's face ... double quotes, he trailed off, unable to finish. "We used to be able to talk about anything," Sarah continued. "Remember when we were newlyweds and we'd stay up until 2 a.m. just talking? When did we stop being able to do that?" David looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. "I think I stopped talking because I was afraid of disappointing you. And then I disappointed you anyway, in the worst possible way. I stopped listening because I was so angry," Sarah admitted. "I felt like you didn't trust me, didn't respect me enough to include me in our own life decisions. So I shut down." They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, David spoke again. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. But I don't know how to fix this." Sarah felt tears building behind her eyes. "I don't either. We've hurt each other so much." "The trust is broken, David. How do we rebuild that?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I want to try, for Emma, for us, for what we used to have. Maybe we need help." The suggestion of counseling had come up before in their arguments, usually hurled as an accusation or ultimatum. Now it felt like a lifeline, a possibility rather than a threat. "Okay," Sarah said, surprising herself with the word. "Okay, let's get help." That afternoon, Sarah made the call to a marriage counselor her friend Lisa had quietly recommended months earlier. As she scheduled their first appointment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. Dr. Patricia Gonzalez had kind eyes and a calm presence that made Sarah feel slightly less exposed as she and David sat on the cream-colored couch in her office. The marriage counselor's space was designed to be soothing, soft lighting, plants in the corners, and a box of tissues strategically placed on the coffee table between them. "I want to start by acknowledging how difficult it is to be here," Dr. Gonzalez said, her voice warm but professional. "Taking this step shows courage and commitment to your marriage and family." Sarah glanced at David, who was sitting rigidly beside her, his hands folded tightly in his lap. She could feel the tension radiating from him, matching her own nervous energy. They had barely spoken during the drive to the appointment. both lost in their own anxieties about what they might uncover in this room. "Can you tell me what brought you here today?" Dr. Gonzalez asked. Sarah and David exchanged a look, each waiting for the other to begin. Finally, Sarah spoke. "We've lost each other. We love each other, but we don't like each other very much right now. And our daughter is starting to notice." David nodded slowly. "I made some bad financial decisions and hid them from Sarah. That broke something between us, and we can't seem to fix it on our own." Dr. Gonzalez listened without judgment as they took turns sharing their perspectives. Sarah talked about feeling excluded and deceived, about how David's secretiveness had made her question everything she thought she knew about their partnership. David spoke about his shame and fear of disappointing Sarah, how he had convinced himself that solving problems alone was protecting her when really it was protecting himself from her potential reaction. "I can see you both have been carrying a lot of pain," Dr. Gonzalez observed. "David, your intention was to protect, but the impact was that Sarah felt excluded and deceived. Sarah, your anger is understandable, but David experienced it as confirmation of his fears about disappointing you. You've been stuck in a cycle where you're both trying to protect yourselves, but inadvertently hurting each other." The session continued with Dr. Gonzalez guiding them through their first real conversation in months. She helped them identify their communication patterns, how Sarah's criticism triggered David's withdrawal, which then triggered more criticism from Sarah as she felt him pulling away. "I want to give you both some homework," Dr. Gonzalez said near the end of their session. "This week, I want you to practice what I call generous interpretation. When your partner does or says something that bothers you, instead of assuming the worst intention, try to imagine a more generous interpretation of their motives." Sarah felt skeptical but willing to try. The drive home was quiet, but not with the heavy silence that had characterized their recent interactions. Instead, there was a sense of possibility, fragile and new. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, David appeared in the kitchen with a folder of papers. Her first instinct was irritation. He was bringing work to the dinner table again. But then she remembered Dr. Gonzalez's assignment and tried to reframe her interpretation. "Are those the financial papers you mentioned in therapy?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. David looked surprised by her calm tone. "Yes, I thought maybe you'd want to go through them together after Emma goes to bed. If you're willing." Sarah felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope. "I'd like that." Later that night, they spread the papers across their dining room table. As David walked her through their financial situation, the mistakes he'd made, the loans he'd taken, the money he'd lost trying to fix his initial errors, Sarah felt her anger rising again. But she also saw his shame, his genuine remorse, and his fear of her reaction. "We can fix this," she said finally, surprising them both. "It's not good, but it's not insurmountable. We can fix this together." David's eyes filled with tears. "I should have trusted you from the beginning." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "You should have. But we're here now, and we can move forward from here." It was the first real conversation they'd had in months, and though it was difficult, it felt like a beginning. 3 weeks into counseling, Sarah and David were learning that rebuilding trust was like learning to walk again after an injury, slow, sometimes painful, and requiring constant conscious effort. The generous interpretation exercise had helped them avoid some of their usual fight triggers, but deeper issues kept surfacing. During their 4th session, Dr. Gonzalez introduced a new concept, active listening. "I want you to practice truly hearing each other, not just waiting for your turn to respond or defend yourselves." She had them face each other on the couch, something that initially felt awkward and forced. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she and David had looked directly at each other for an extended period without it being during an argument. "David, I want you to share something that's been bothering you." "Sarah, your job is simply to listen and reflect back what you hear. without defending or explaining. Then we'll switch. David took a deep breath. I feel like I've been walking on eggshells for years. I know I messed up with the financial stuff, but even before that, I felt like nothing I did was good enough. When I worked late, you were upset that I wasn't home. When I was home, you criticized how I loaded the dishwasher or folded the laundry. I started avoiding being around you because I was tired of feeling like a failure. Sarah's immediate impulse was to defend herself, to explain that she hadn't meant to be critical, that she was just trying to maintain their home. But Dr. Gonzalez's gentle hand gesture reminded her to just listen. What I hear you saying, Sarah said carefully, is that you felt criticized and judged even before the financial problems. You felt like you couldn't do anything right in my eyes, so you started withdrawing to protect yourself. David nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Yes, exactly. When it was Sarah's turn, she found herself sharing something she hadn't fully articulated before. I felt like you stopped seeing me as a partner. You made decisions about our life without including me. You worked late and brought work home, and I felt like I was raising Emma and managing our household alone. When you did help, it felt like you were doing me a favor rather than participating in our shared life. I became critical because I felt invisible. David reflected back what he heard, and Sarah felt a profound relief at being truly understood. They were both quiet for several minutes, processing what they had learned about each other. Can you see how you both were trying to protect yourselves, but ended up hurting each other? Dr. Gonzalez asked gently. David, your withdrawal made Sarah feel more invisible, which increased her criticism. Sarah, your criticism confirmed David's fears of not being good enough, which made him withdraw more. The revelation was both painful and liberating. They had been locked in a destructive dance, each step intended as self-protection, but actually escalating their mutual hurt. At home, they began practicing these new skills. When David came home from work, instead of immediately retreating to his office, he would sit with Sarah and Emma, asking about their day and sharing details about his own. When Sarah felt the urge to criticize how he packed Emma's lunch, she would pause and ask herself if the issue was really worth addressing or if she was just feeling a need to control. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, David paused in his dishwashing. I want to tell you something, he said. I know I withdrew from you, but I want you to know it was never because I didn't love you. I was just so afraid of disappointing you that I stopped trying to connect. Sarah set down the dish towel and turned to face him fully. I criticized you because I felt lonely in our marriage. I thought if I could just get you to do things the way I wanted, maybe you'd be more present. But I see now that I was pushing you away instead of drawing you closer. They stood in their kitchen, really seeing each other for the first time in years. It wasn't a magical moment of instant healing, but it was honest and real, and it felt like another step toward finding their way back to each other. 2 months into therapy, Dr. Gonzalez introduced the concept that would become the cornerstone of Sarah and David's. Healing, forgiveness. Not the simple, I'm sorry, and it's okay, they had exchanged countless times over the years, but a deeper, more intentional process of releasing resentment and choosing to rebuild trust. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing harmful behavior, Dr. Gonzalez explained during their session. It's about choosing to release the hold that resentment has on you and creating space for something new to grow. Sarah shifted uncomfortably on the couch. But what if forgiveness feels like letting him off the hook? What if it means I'm saying what he did was okay? Forgiveness doesn't mean the betrayal was acceptable, Dr. Gonzalez replied. It means you're choosing not to let that betrayal define your relationship forever. David, what does forgiveness mean to you? David was quiet for a long moment. I think I need to forgive myself before I can really accept forgiveness from Sarah. I've been carrying so much shame about the financial mess and about how I shut her out. That shame is keeping me from being fully present now. This led to a breakthrough conversation about the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt was about actions. I did something bad. Shame was about identity. I'm a bad person. David had been living in shame, which made it impossible for him to believe he deserved forgiveness or to fully engage in the work of rebuilding their relationship. Dr. Gonzalez gave them an exercise to practice at home. Each evening for a week, they would sit together and share one thing they were grateful for about their partner and one thing they forgave them for from that day. It started small, Sarah forgiving David for leaving his coffee cup on the counter, David forgiving Sarah for her impatient tone when he forgot to pick up Emma's prescription. But as the week progressed, the forgiveness grew deeper. Sarah found herself forgiving David for the years of emotional distance, not just the financial deception. David forgave Sarah for the criticism that had made him feel small and inadequate. They began to see how they had both contributed to the breakdown of their connection. The real test came during their 6th week of therapy when they had their first major argument since starting counseling. Emma had been invited to a friend's birthday party that conflicted with a family gathering at David's parents' house. Sarah wanted to let Emma go to the party. David felt obligated to attend the family event. Their old pattern would have been for Sarah to become critical and demanding while David withdrew and made the decision unilaterally. Instead, something different happened. When Sarah felt her voice rising, she caught herself and said, "I'm getting triggered right now. Can we pause and try this again?" David, instead of shutting down, took a breath and said, "I want to understand why this is important to you." They talked through their different perspectives. Sarah's desire to prioritize Emma's social connections, David's sense of duty to family obligations. They found a compromise. They would attend the family gathering for the first hour, then take Emma to the party afterward. More importantly, they had navigated conflict without damaging each other. That night, as they lay in the same bed, for the first time in months, Sarah reached for David's hand. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "Not just for the money stuff, but for all of it. For shutting me out, for making me feel alone in our marriage. I forgive you, and I want to start over." David squeezed her hand. "I forgive you too. For the criticism, for making me feel like I couldn't do anything right. And I forgive myself for being such a coward about our problems." They lay in the darkness, holding hands and feeling something new growing between them. It wasn't the naive trust of their early marriage, but something more mature and intentional. They were choosing each other again, with full knowledge of each other's flaws and capacity for hurt. "This is harder than I thought it would be," Sarah whispered. "But it's worth it," David replied. "We're worth it." 6 months after their first therapy session, Sarah and David were planning their 15th wedding anniversary. Not the grand gesture kind of planning they might have done in their early marriage, but something more meaningful, a celebration of the work they had done and the marriage they were rebuilding. The changes hadn't been dramatic or sudden. There was no single moment when everything clicked back into place. Instead, their reconnection had been built through small, daily choices. David choosing to share his work stress with Sarah instead of carrying it alone. Sarah choosing to express appreciation for his efforts instead of focusing on what he hadn't done perfectly. Both of them choosing to assume good intentions when old triggers arose. Emma had noticed the shift. "You and Daddy are friends again?" she had observed one morning over breakfast, watching her parents coordinate their schedules and share private jokes. The simple statement had brought tears to Sarah's eyes because it captured something essential. They were friends again, in addition to being partners and parents. Their financial situation had slowly improved as well. Working together, they had created a budget, consolidated their debts, and developed a plan to rebuild their savings. David had taken on some weekend tax preparation work, and Sarah had started tutoring students after school. The extra income helped, but more importantly, they were facing their challenges as a team. Dr. Gonzalez had reduced their sessions to every other week, then once a month. During their most recent appointment, she had asked them to reflect on what they had learned. "I learned that love isn't enough," Sarah had said. "Love has to be backed up by actions, by daily choices to prioritize your partner and your relationship. I also learned that I can't control David or fix our problems through criticism. I can only control my own responses and choices." David had added, "I learned that protecting Sarah from problems wasn't actually protecting her at all. It was protecting me from difficult conversations. Real protection means including her in our challenges so we can face them together. I also learned that shame is toxic to relationships. When I was focused on how bad I felt about my mistakes, I couldn't focus on making things right." Now, as they planned their anniversary dinner, they found themselves talking about the future in ways they hadn't in years. David had surprised Sarah by suggesting they take a family vacation that summer, the first real vacation they had planned together in 3 years. Sarah had surprised David by telling him she was proud of how hard he had worked to rebuild their financial security. "I want to do something different for our anniversary," Sarah said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Instead of just going to dinner, what if we wrote letters to each other? About what we've learned, what we're grateful for, what we want for our future?" David smiled, remembering the handwritten notes they used to leave for each other when they were newlyweds. "I'd like that." On their anniversary night, after Emma was asleep, they sat in their living room with their letters. Sarah went first, her voice steady as she read about forgiveness and second chances, about choosing love as an action rather than just a feeling. David's letter talked about trust and vulnerability, about the courage required to show up honestly in a relationship. When they finished reading, they sat quietly for a moment, both emotional and grateful. "I never thought we'd get here," Sarah admitted. "6 months ago, I wasn't sure we were going to make it." "We're not the same people we were when we got married," David replied, "but maybe that's okay. Maybe we're better versions of ourselves now." Sarah reached for his hand, the gesture that had become their symbol of choosing each other again and again. "I love who we're becoming together." They had learned that forgiveness wasn't a destination but a journey, not a one-time event but a daily practice. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They still had disagreements, still triggered each other's sensitivities sometimes. But they had learned to repair quickly, to assume good intentions, and to prioritize their connection over being right. As they headed upstairs together, Sarah reflected on how different this anniversary felt from the previous one, when they had gone through the motions of celebrating while feeling like strangers. Tonight, they were celebrating not just their past, but their choice to build a future together. The most profound lesson from Sarah and David's journey is that love alone is not enough to sustain a marriage. It must be paired with intentional actions, honest communication, and the daily choice to prioritize your partner and